Welcome back to the Bridge Coffee Roasters podcast. This is episode 4, and in today's episode we are hearing a conversation that we had with David Rickenback, who is Coffee Beverage Community Expert here in the UK for Nuova Distributions. You'll often bump into David at trade shows and coffee festivals all around the UK. He's a really interesting character with so many different hobbies and interests in coffee. It was really obvious that we could have kept the camera rolling for a good 2-3 hours. But in this conversation, we mainly touched on how to build a menu for your coffee shop, designing different drinks and brands, and how to create a community beyond the products that you serve. I really hope you enjoy today's conversation, and I'll see you in the next episode. So David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about your role. What is a coffee beverage community expert?
Wonderful. So my name is David Rickenback, and I am the coffee beverage and community expert for Nuova Distribution UK, which is the essentially the distribution supplier of Victoria Arduino machines and Nuova Simonelli machines in the UK. Mm-hmm. And my particular role is quite a diverse one. So it covers areas all the way from post-sales down to menu design and cafe design for people, and really supporting them at the end users, essentially, and the distributors at different points in our relationship. So very different from a lot of the other kind of roles which would be similar. Yeah. That I am between both Italy and the UK, so I'm reporting back to R&D in Italy, and I'm also supporting customers here as well. And it could be anywhere from helping them with the design of their cafe, down to individual seasonal menu items, down to roast curves in their actual roastery. So it's a real diverse role.
Very varied, yeah.
Yes, and you'll see me a lot at festivals, particularly on the Victoria Arduino bar. And normally these are menus that I've kind of developed, me and my team essentially. And we are trying to showcase what partners are doing, but also what you can do with coffee and tea beyond just serving it as a plain beverage.
So when you talk about menus, are you talking about the sort of composition of a coffee, or are you talking about a menu that someone is going to choose from in a cafe?
Oh, it's an interesting one. So on the one hand, menu in a cafe. Okay. There are many people who will start businesses now who are opening a cafe for the first time. They've not got a hospitality background. Perhaps they are moving into it. It's one of their dreams to start a cafe. And they look around the local area and they're not entirely sure what they're looking to serve. But they know what kind of machine they would like. They would know what kind of philosophy they would like to approach. And so one of the big discussions then from my side and also the sales and marketing team is to really have a discussion about what kind of relationship do you want with your coffee supplier, and then what kind of relationship do you want with the surrounding community? Are you going to go into central London? Are you going to try and compete with some of the more hyper specialty coffee shops, or are you just looking to serve coffee that you like, that you might have had on a trip to Italy, and you want to replicate that more European approach to coffee? Yep. Yeah. And so trying to help build a menu looking at the surrounding area, what they want to achieve from their coffee, and what makes them happy, really. Yeah. And then on the festival side, it's we do a lot of coffee festivals and a lot of trade shows. And one of the big things that we really try to focus on is not competing with the people we're supplying machinery to. What we want to do is take their coffee and then complement it, show what we can do with it. If someone has a very fruit-forward coffee, how can we turn this into a mocktail so that people can try it and go, oh, that's really interesting. And I can point to the other stand and say, go try the coffee in its more natural form.
Yeah. Okay. That's really interesting.
Talking about coffee in its natural form. Sorry, we got a little V60.
We do, and it's getting colder and colder.
Yeah. Let's pour a little bit of that while we talk. It's a honey processed red Bourbon from Burundi.
Excellent.
And this is the last of the bag, and I've been very much enjoying it. Sorry, Max. What were you going to say?
I can't. I've got no idea what I was about to say.
Oh, dear.
I'm happy to be
That's
sidetracked by coffee.
Cool.
Are you having some?
I'll
have a little bit, yeah, please.
I'll sort that for you.
Burundi is actually one of my favorite origins.
Nice. Okay.
It's one of the kind
Did
of
not know that.
So I have a deep love of Rwandan coffee, Burundi, and El Salvador in particular. I find there is, particularly with coffees from Burundi and coffees from Rwanda, a certain type of acidity that I really enjoy, and it has a more rounded body at the end of it.
Yeah.
Burundi, as kind of an exporting nation, is complex, but it has some incredible coffees coming out of it.
It does.
And it's one of those origins that you don't immediately jump to, but it has a real diversity in terms of flavor, even from having really only one varietal and a few others.
Yeah.
But it's
interesting when you mentioned Rwanda there. We've just brewed, haven't we, roasted 2 sample batches of an anaerobic Rwandan and also an anaerobic Kenyan. And like going into it, looking at the specs, I was thinking the Kenyan was going to hit us between the eyes. That was going to be phenomenal. And the Rwandan would be sort of somewhere behind it. It was completely the opposite way around, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In fact, the Kenyan was quite frankly disappointing. And I hardly dare say
Blame
that.
the roaster.
I roast it, so I'll blame myself. But it is interesting how you can't just take an origin, even if it's an origin like Kenya. I mean, it's such a solid, reliable origin in one sense. But it wasn't for us. So.
Yeah, no, this is it. Like every coffee has its place and every coffee has its customer.
Yeah.
And we're seeing now that rise in kind of Rwandan coffees and a change in the type of Kenyans that you would normally buy. And I'm all for it, basically.
Yeah.
I'm really enjoying a lot of the Rwandan coffees coming out.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
In like the role that you do that you just spoken about, then like in essence you're kind of a consultant, right? To these guys,
Like in essence, I provide kind of experience,
and that's great, and that's very similar to the role I play in our business these days. And so I think there's lots we can talk about. But I'm just, from your perspective, seeing the customers that you're talking to, what do you think? Where do you think the market is going in terms of single origin versus blended coffee?
Oh, it's a really interesting question. So I think there was a short period where people started to reject blends and talk about single origin, but I think there's really a place for both at the moment.
I think so.
I find it very strange when people say, "Oh, I hate blends," but actually, a lot of the blends, particularly from yourselves as an example, are designed so you take the perhaps acidity of a specific type of coffee, you combine it with the body of another type of coffee, and the sweetness of another, and you're building a blend to kind of complement each of the individual components. And I think in that aspect, blends are definitely coming back in a trend, but also in a way that people are a bit more understanding that you are not necessarily hiding deficiencies of other coffees, but rather you are complementing them to make something greater than
you're
the
accentuating certain features of certain coffees.
This is it.
And that's exactly what we try and do with some of our higher end coffees.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think even from a roasting perspective, you've just had a look at our roastery.
Yes.
And you would have seen our blender.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of people aren't doing it on the scale that we are, but we think by roasting coffee as single origins and then blending after, you're going to get the best out of each individual coffee. And then it doesn't work for every blend, interestingly. Some it is definitely worth just sticking it all in the drum at the same time.
Yeah.
But for certain coffees, particularly if you're maybe blending a wash with a natural, for example, to the difference in the clarity of the actual drink itself by roasting it independently and blending afterwards is definitely something that we feel is worth doing.
This is it. And so when people come, there's often been a coffee that's inspired them.
Yep.
And it might have been a blend in a shop, or that might be why they've chosen to work with a particular roaster, or they have a certain type of coffee that they really like. Maybe they really like the chocolatey Brazils, or they really enjoy actually something a bit more funky. And that discussion is on then, do you look for those in your customers as something that's going to be one of your guests or one of your house? And then you can kind of build a conversation around that, around the coffee in particular. And one of the key things we'll probably talk about is consistency being a huge element of this. Yeah. And a blend also allows you to have a more consistent profile throughout the year as harvest change and seasons change.
Absolutely. The thing that we find a lot of people, and I say this a lot actually, to customers when we're talking to them, and I would view central London slightly different to this, but if I view the UK as a whole, most people just want a coffee-flavoured coffee. Don't know if you'd agree with that.
I'm from Norfolk, so a lot of people say frothy coffee.
Yeah. So
people pleasers.
Exactly. I mean, most coffee in the UK is drunk with a whole lot of milk.
Yes.
And therefore, you just want a solid sort of chocolatey, nutty, caramelly coffee, the bulk of it is probably going to come from Brazil or Ethiopia or somewhere, and then you've just got something to sort of add a little bit of nuance on the top.
Yeah, and I think this is where a lot of the discussion can be had about how do we achieve that end kind of profile that people want.
Absolutely.
So there is space to have nicer coffee, more sustainable, more transparent coffee at an affordable price, which is achieving the same kind of sweetness that you're looking for in that coffee. There will be different skill levels at the end when people are making kind of their lattes. But if there is more positive impact happening along the supply chain from the machine to the coffee to the space itself, then it's a win for everyone.
Absolutely. And we're finding, I mean, you mentioned like transparency and supply chain and that kind of thing. We're noting if I go back 10 years, people talked about transparency in the supply chain even back then, and it was something that was almost novel at that point, and something that they wanted to know more about the farmer and stuff. And there was a lot of the bigger players in the industry would put a random picture of somebody in a coffee plantation somewhere. Didn't really mean a lot, but that kind of satisfied people's urges at that point. Yeah. Now that is absolutely not the case, and they actually want to hear the stories behind the coffees, and indeed the stories of the people that are actually benefiting from that coffee.
There's a very interesting sort of asymmetry in this relationship, and it's a really interesting topic to talk about, because as customers, we want to know, and roasters and everyone down the cafe chain, we want to know where the coffee's come from. We want to know that it's come from a farm which has taken care of its workers. We want to know it comes through sustainable practices or ecoforestry. And we are looking down the supply chain and knowing now where most of this coffee is coming from. Some of the farmers that have reached kind of the rock star level globally. And then on the other side of things, you've got the farmers who are not sure who's drinking the coffee at the end. So actually building the relationships with the roasters, building a relationship with the cafes, and building a relationship with the machine suppliers gives the farmer also a sense of power and empowerment to know what's happening to their coffee.
And I think that's a really important thing, because we saw that kind of firsthand last year at some point. The coffee that at the time we were getting from Uganda, which is a lovely coffee. It was part of our retail range at the time, and it was quite eye-opening to me, because I'd always thought of sustainability and the making the farmer visible to the customer. But to be honest, at that point, I'd never really thought about it the other way around, making the drinker like visible to the farmer. But we've never been to that particular Ugandan farm, to be honest. But we through the importer, we actually sent some of the packaging back to them. Yeah. And that was a huge deal to them, and we've got pictures of them like looking at the box we were sending in, and they were like so pleased to see what their product ended up like. It was quite a big moment for me, actually.
And we heard that from Simon in the previous episode.
Yeah,
he was saying like, because he's an importer, buyer of coffee. He's taken a few farmers over to this side of the industry, the drinking side, and he said, like, seeing their own name or the name of their farm on a bag of roasted coffee on the shelf in a cafe is really cool.
Yeah. It's and I think it's easy to underestimate what that actually means to them, because they're the guys, they're in the field in sort of high temperatures, high humidity. It's like not the most desirable temperature to be working hard, in essence. And they being able to see what that product actually does.
Yeah, fruits of their labour.
The fruits of their labour is great.
Yeah. No, this is it. It's fascinating, because if you go to a football ground, if you go to a rugby ground, any of them, they are drinking coffee there.
Yeah.
And to know as a farmer perhaps that your coffee's being served at one of these stadiums, it's a really interesting reaction. It's like, oh, I didn't know it was making it this far. Yeah. Or like, I didn't know people know my name. I think when you go to London Coffee Festival and some of the other larger coffee festivals, and you see occasionally producers walking around and people are recognizing them, it must be a strange experience to be like, definitely.
It must be.
I'm on the other side of the world,
Yeah.
and people are starting to know my name.
Yeah.
People are starting to know my farms, and it's really fascinating because I think a lot of the branding and communication has shifted from origins to farms, and in some ways this is really beneficial to those who are in the know and they are aware of the farms, but also it's really beneficial as kind of a brand representation for the farmers as well to say, oh, I'm associated with this brand. Oh, this is my farm.
Yeah.
And you become to trust the farmer and the farms. And it goes beyond just an origin then.
Definitely it does. Yeah.
So you were talking at the start about going in, helping someone design a menu.
Yes.
And that it sort of starts with their vision.
Yeah.
And that's something I've been working on a little bit recently as a bit of a guide to building a brand. So step one also there is, what's your vision?
Yep.
So like you said, do you want to be, one of the main competitors in London, or do you want to be, a little bakery in Norfolk or whatever it is?
Yeah. What's the dream here?
Yeah. So how does, what kind of impact does the vision have on what you then do with a coffee menu?
I mean, the vision itself gives you a better understanding to what they're trying to achieve. There are many people who would like to open a cafe and retire at that cafe and keep it at its stable size. There are some people who would like to conquer the world. But really to sit down with someone and understand what's possible within their their business plan, to talk about their budget, to talk about what it is they're offering in terms of differentiation or what it is they're trying to represent as a company is always really interesting. And designing a menu around that really depends on what they're trying to achieve. Some people are looking at coffee as a seasonality. So they're buying with the seasons, or they are working with particular partners as a way to grow together. And within that, we're also part of that relationship is what is the right machine for them. And is it us? Mm-hmm. And what is it they want to achieve? Many of them, we talk about sustainability. Many of them really want to build from the start a company that's sustainable, both in terms of the ecological aspects of their business, but also the sociological aspects of their business, and building it in from the start and seeing if that's possible with their budget, with their design, with their space. And it becomes a deeper discussion then, both with the sales team on the practicality of it, and then with myself when it comes to what kind of partners would you like to work with? Because, for example, if someone would like to really focus on trying to have a B Corp organization, we'll talk about who works with us that has that status. And then what does it stretch to? Does it also go to their tea supply? Does it also go to their food suppliers?
Yeah.
Like what does our supply chain look like? And that's where we can kind of fit in and talk about this and then design around that. Some places might serve alcohol, some places might not. Some places have a really strong focus on things beyond coffee, like mixology, building upon kind of a menu that is sometimes complex, but sometimes really easy to create, whether you're mixing just coffee and ginger beer to create like a dark and stormy equivalent. There is a real kind of discussion there, one-to-one, about what is possible within costs and what is possible in the design, and does it fit the ethos?
You've mentioned now several times so far sort of mixology. And
Yes.
Is this a bit of a thing of yours?
It comes within my remit. I do, so my background was in coffee and also in tea, but mixology has come in as well. Really? It's kind of the third element. There is a real growth of it. If you travel up north, you can see a lot of cafes are trying to expand out the menu of what can I do with this coffee and how can I create maybe like a new mocktail, and the same for tea. And
are they, in that instance, are they selling these mocktails or promoting these mocktails as an evening drink, or is this something that someone might just come at 10:30 in the morning and have?
Within the menu. It's,
okay.
If you're building it with alcohol, then definitely you'll need a license, and you're probably looking at evening things. You see it now with the cafes extending to natural wine bars, and you also see cafes extending to cocktail bars, and coffee becoming more than just a focus, but also an element in something greater. And so when you are looking at menus, it's what is possible and what will actually sell. Because if you're trying to differentiate yourself, say you're next to a large chain, then actually having higher quality coffees, but also some drinks which are not necessarily for the coffee drinker, or something a bit more seasonal. Say you want something for summer and you want something light and refreshing beyond a kind of a tonic and coffee. There's some really interesting stuff out there at the moment.
What do you think of tonic and coffee?
I adore it, actually.
You do? Because it's definitely something that divides opinion, isn't it?
Yeah, it depends. So it's you have to put in high quality components to get a high quality drink.
Yeah.
I don't think I've done that enough yet.
Yeah. So one of my key jobs is not just working with coffee companies. I work very closely with tea companies, and I work closely with drinks companies. And so using high quality tonics, or tonics which suit a particular coffee.
Yeah.
For one of the events we did recently, we used a single origin with a high amount of acidity, and it had a really nice lemon flavor to it, essentially.
Okay.
To balance that, to try to bring out more of it, we also used a violet tonic, and that gave some florality to this coffee, and it really balanced off well. And for that particular event, it very much fit kind of the ethos and the vibe. I wouldn't go to a local cafe and get violet tonics, but for depending on the environment, you can kind of build equivalent drinks. Some things appeal to certain audiences. When we're doing festivals, I'm quite aware of when is the right time to build something which tastes like a sticky toffee pudding in a cup, and when is the right time to build something which is a bit more, more like citrus, violets, florals, ice drinks. Yeah.
That's really interesting.
So you did a talk at Bristol Coffee Festival.
Yes.
About community.
Yes.
Building, I can't remember the exact title. Building a community beyond coffee.
Yes. It was essentially building, maximizing community engagement outside of beyond coffee.
Yeah. Okay.
And this is an understanding about what a cafe is for and the idea behind a cafe. I think a lot of the time nowadays, we will talk about cafe design is kind of a perfect example. There is a cookie cutter approach where you see something you like and you, in a sense, try to make it yours.
Yep.
And then understanding what impact you have as resources that you have. So a cafe has multiple assets. One, space is a huge part of it, both on the floor and also on the walls. The other part of it is time. So there are certain, generally speaking, cafes are quite limited in the amount of time they're open. They're open for morning rush and then evening.
Yep.
And then once it hits after work, they tend to close. What that means is you have additional time. You have time where the cafe is out of hours, which can be used. And so one of the key aspects is that you can build a community around your cafe, which really builds off a particular thing that you are passionate about as an owner, or actually as a customer. So it might be something as simple as this cafe, I really like running, and I would like to engage with this cafe and build a run club, and maybe get a sponsored t-shirt, or really I want to end my run here and have a nice coffee. Yeah. And having an open conversation with the owners and being like, I'd like to do this, means that the owner can also engage in this kind of conversation, build off of it, and go like, oh, we'll promote your run club. If you can get 20 people here, maybe we'll give you a small discount. You can build a real conversation there and build a community around it. Yeah. But you also have to build a culture into it as well. And so it has to be part of the ethos of the cafe. When I was running cafes as a kind of a multi-site manager with lots of charities, one of the big things was looking around and seeing what the customers of those sites' specific problems were. One of them was loneliness. And so it's a discussion about, do we have enough time in the cafe day to have a space for people just to meet and have a community kind of spot where they can come, and then also engage with local charities who will then come and use the space as well. It does a few things. One, it brings in people to the cafe, but it also gives you positive associations as well. If you're making an impact in your community, the community will also come back to you. There's a lot of statistics around this, for example, with the Allegra group, who observed that around 70% of people were using their local coffee shop to buy their coffee, and the remaining were using apps or the internet. And engaging with your local kind of coffee shop has been a key thing for the longest time. And if you're, as a coffee shop or a cafe, able to engage with your community beyond just I sell you coffee, or you get your natural source of caffeine here, but you also come here for meetings, you come here for art exhibitions, you're using local artists on the wall. I also buy my candles here. Yeah. Like, the more you build into that portfolio of what people want around that cafe, the more, the deeper you can engage with them and the bigger the relationship is.
And I think that really comes back to what you were saying about the vision. And it's something that it's really interesting to hear your take on that, because that's something that we actually kind of major on, isn't it, Jack, in terms of...
Step one of working with us.
Exactly. So we have what we call our methodology, and that starts with understanding the vision of the owner or the operator. Sometimes they have a vision. Sometimes you have to help them to create that vision, or at least kind of draw it out of them. They may have it, but they haven't necessarily articulated it in that full way. But we've seen so much of what you've just spoken about, and I think. Run clubs. You see, coffee and cycling is a thing.
Yes.
Coffee and dogs is a thing, isn't it? Yeah. And then you got coffee and mental health.
Yes.
That's another big thing. And these are all great causes and great things to kind of partner up with. But definitely having a community that's beyond coffee is in essence you're sort of preserving your legacy. And you're kind of giving yourself a reason for being beyond just making a buck. I think that ultimately will give you longevity.
Yeah. There's often a confusion that your customers are your community, but it's really the other way around. The community around the cafe become your customers just by association and through a real affinity towards you. Because there are many people who don't drink coffee or tea who will come to the cafe as a space to work, or they will use it as something that isn't just the coffee. But the coffee itself is really the main way you speak to a large portion of your customer base. If they come in, they like it. If the barista is kind of educated on where the coffee comes from, they have a full transparency about it, they're passionate, then you're able to engage with people on a deeper level. But then the more things that are happening that involve your cafe, the wider your net goes.
Absolutely. And we've seen that so many times, and not just on the high street. I mean, a lot of what we do is not on the high street. It's like what we call off the high street cafes. But even in those instances where it might be, say, a coffee shop in a garden centre or something, that is often, and we've heard this just recently, that can be up to 30% of that garden centre's revenue comes from that cafe. And their clientele might be a lot of older people often. And it's a lot of older people don't necessarily have a lot of disposable income on a pension or what have you. So they may come to the cafe, buy a small packet of seeds or something, and then spend 4 hours talking to their friends in the cafe. Yeah. And that's huge. That's huge for the cafe because they're spending money in the cafe. But it's huge for them because that's combating things like loneliness, as you mentioned.
Giving them a community.
It's giving them a community in a space that they feel at home in.
Yes. It's that engagement happens on all levels as well. It starts in the coffee shop, but then if there's a connection there where someone as a customer feels connected to all elements of that cafe, from down to the coffee, they really love the coffee, from down to the aesthetic of the cafe, down to the machine that's sitting in the corner, where they go, I like the look of that, it fits in. Like every element of the cafe that's considered has a huge impact on people's experiences. One of the big things I often talk about is when you ask people what was your favorite cafe experience, they often can't remember the coffee, but they remember how it made you feel.
Exactly.
And it's the entire environment that fits into it. And that's where we really want to build kind of a deeper and more understanding relationship and communication. It's this real open communication with a cafe or an end user. One of the big things I talk about is the fact if they're getting coffee from yourselves, I'm not the specialist in that coffee. I'm not there to teach basic barista skills. That comes from yourselves because you know what the coffee needs to taste like at the end, what the real flavor profile that the farmer wants out of this is going to be and what the roaster is trying to showcase. Where I come in is filling in gaps where there might be some operational sides of it, translating that to the machine and making people feel comfortable making changes on their machine, but also making them feel comfortable within their own space that all things are considered. And I think that's where a lot of the relationship right back to the green coffee is all steps are then part of the picture at the end.
I'm keen to talk to both of you about branding as well, and
Oh,
how
please,
that
please.
fits into community and vision and all that kind of stuff, because that's a passion of both of you.
Yes.
I'm sensing.
It is.
Always.
Yeah. I don't know if I have a question, but someone talk about branding. Yeah. How does the brand of a cafe or a bag of coffee, how does that play into the community that a cafe can build?
I mean, we probably come from it from two different perspectives, but also kind of the same idea is that the first point is you eat with your eyes. And
Absolutely.
so there needs to be a real kind of, a lot of people identify with brands, and particularly they identify the coffee, and how the coffee tastes and how the coffee relates to you will often be influenced by your relationship to that company.
Yeah.
If you love that company because you really like, you know, their social media presence, you really like the people who work there, you're going to like the coffee more by default because you're starting at a higher position. There is also the reverse, where the coffee could be not to your style, but you really like the company.
Yeah.
When we talk about branding, one of the big kind of topics is what the branding is trying to achieve. So what is kind of the core, at the core of the philosophy of the company that you're building? Yeah. If you are trying to position your cafe as a local cafe that's serving kind of Italian roast coffee, and you're really focused on the food, if you label it as like high end, you really focus on like super specific niches that you might find, or you might be using specific terminology, like talking about farms and really like processes, it might alienate the customer base that you're actually going after.
Absolutely.
Whereas if you're also going to the more high-end kind of focus of cafes, and you really want to be the best in town, and then you come with a brown bag with a stamp on it, it has the opposite effect to what you're trying to achieve.
Absolutely.
And so there really needs to be a reflection of this. Yeah. And Victoria Arduino in particular, you can kind of see it when you look at the machines. They are heavily design forward and tried to build off this very kind of simplified brand of this, the kind of the V and the arrows, where there's a real focus around where does the machine sit within a cafe or in a hotel. And that's one of the big discussions, is about customizability of the machines and can it fit in multiple environments.
Yeah.
And I think it's a really important thing when it comes to branding. I mean, we often talk about branding in terms of logos and color palettes and all this kind of good stuff. And you can get all excited and get your crayons out and make something really nice and et cetera, et cetera. But that's a component of what a brand is, but it's not what the brand is. Yeah. A brand is how a brand is everything, but it's also how it makes your customer feel.
Yes.
That is what your brand is. Whether you like it or not, that is what your brand is. So I think what you were saying earlier on about, it is really, really pertinent, because a brand can be, it can be, whether it's the name above the shop, whether it's the bag on the shelf, that's just a component in essence. And while we do get parachuted into a lot of our customers to kind of try and like just give me something, give me a logo, give me a name, give me a bag that looks nice, all that kind of stuff, and yeah, like there's a place for that. I mean, often you're having to work within the parameters of an existing brand that already is already there, so you have kind of a limited scope. But in essence, you've got it may be is about your target customer. Yeah. And what your target customer actually wants to see and what they want to feel. So it may be someone in central London who wants that artisan feel. They want to know like everything about what's in the cup, and they want to, and that's the brand, and everything's really organic, and that's a vibe, isn't it? And that may be it for us. Our personal brand, like we've kind of tried to create it or curate it so that we kind of give a business class kind of feel to what we do. That's the sort of vibe we're creating. We're not trying to be that artisan roaster, and in that way, because that's not our market. Yeah. And I think it's important for people to understand that brand is how it makes you feel.
Yeah. And we see a lot of like misalignment as well between a business's like brand and their service environment, and the prices that they charge for whatever it is they do, luxury hotels, for example.
Yeah.
And then the coffee is trash.
Absolutely. That's so true. And I mean, I wrote a blog probably before you joined called Make Coffee Great Again in Hotels or something like that. Because we've all had such bad experiences. You go to a 4 or 5 star hotel and you get given something that just doesn't live up to the price you paid to be there. We've all experienced that, no doubt. Interestingly, we're off topic here, but I think it's an interesting point. I was told by Green Coffee Broker a couple of months ago. I was talking about this actually. I was talking about how coffee in hotels is just notoriously bad. I will say there are hotels now that are kind of getting that, and we've helped a few, and there are others that are definitely on a path to make hotel coffee better. But this coffee broker had an interesting take on it. He said that a chef, the second you're selling coffee to a chef, and which often they're involved in the process in a hotel.
Often the head chef.
They want that really bitter, like heavy, Robusta, heavy, sort of Italian style espresso that everybody wanted in 1997, but now is maybe less sort of prevalent in the UK. But chefs are still kind of hanging on to that because they feel they're almost viewing that as an after dinner espresso is almost like a palate cleanser, which I mean it's not wrong. You can't argue with that. But it's not necessarily the way the coffee industry is heading.
But you're seeing it now in some of the high-end restaurants. They are realizing the last memory someone has of their restaurant is the last thing they consume.
Absolutely.
And that might be the coffee. And so they are trying to up their coffee game and trying to use quite high-end coffees to reflect the food they've just served you. Because if you paid £100 for kind of a 3-course meal and then they finish it with very cheap coffee made through a very cheap machine, it will taste like you've had that. And so we are seeing it now that particularly it's really interesting within bakeries and within delis as well. This has been a really important factor. And I think one of the biggest shifts is we are seeing that people in their lunch break will go and buy a sandwich, right? And if the coffee is good in the place where you get the sandwich, you are going to get your coffee and your sandwich there rather than going to the cafe 10 minutes away and queuing for a second time to get something which is really wonderful. And this kind of change means that people have to be more conscious about the food they serve, the coffee they serve, because people are shortening the amount of time they're spending out of the office, as an example, during lunch. And you can see that big benefit happen where if your food and your coffee are at the same level, reflective, you are going to get more people because they will cover 2 stones, basically.
Definitely, and I think it's interesting that you bring up bakeries. That's definitely a growing sector for us. Bakery chains, and they're becoming more and more a destination for coffee as well as the traditional bakery fare. And it is important that they do upskill to a point, or up their coffee game, should I say, to make it match their product. And that is definitely happening. We're definitely seeing that upskill. Historically there's been a lot of bakery chains that, mentioning no names, have used maybe like a vending supplier for their coffee for their coffee supply, and that has in essence got them off the ground, that they can physically serve you a coffee, but it's not necessarily at the same standard as what the people who are buying their pastries and sandwiches, etc., are now expecting. But that is definitely changing. We're seeing that, aren't we?
I think you see it all around London and all around the UK now. The companies with exponential growth are bakeries serving good coffee. And they are the ones which are really have hit that point where they've realized, we can cover 2 bases. And if we serve really good coffee, people will sit in and they'll buy some more. The amount that people are buying goes from just like maybe a £3.50 pastry to now they're spending £7, £10 per person.
Exactly. You're doubling their spend per head.
Exactly. And this is something we really tried to talk about, is that with machines in particular, is that having a high quality grinder, a high quality machine in those environments, and higher quality coffee going into there means you're going to get more out of it. They are paid back by every single person coming in, and there's a real balance there, which is
absolutely there is,
happening.
and getting. And that's part of our methodology.
Yeah.
So it's really great to hear you say that. Is that like a good quality machine is a vehicle to get your basket spend up.
Yeah.
A good quality machine paired with a good quality coffee is going to cost you more than what you can get from a vending company. We're not going to hide behind that. But the demonstrable difference in profit for you for the owner is huge, because you will capture more people, 20, 30, 40% more.
Yeah.
And so not only are you getting more people through the door, but they're actually spending more.
Yeah. I think this is also where we talk about sustainability, because it fits into this picture, because a spend on a coffee machine is, from many perspectives, quite terrifying, because it's
a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. Yeah. And for a small business, it's a lot of money. But the ideal dream for all of us would be, coffee's low cost, farmer gets paid really well, espresso machine company gets paid well, the roaster gets paid well, my staff get paid well. But in reality, there is a balance to be had. And we often ask, well, at what point do we squeeze? And who suffers in this equation? Who
suffers from the squeeze?
And now that there's hopefully more transparency within the supply chain, we know how much is happening and how much is being costed there. So one of the real ways to kind of prevent that squeeze is by reducing your costs during service. Mm-hmm. And whether that's milk wastage or looking at the machine to be as energy sustainable as possible, and trying to keep your costs down by having machines which are not constantly pumping out energy and costing it sort of 4 times the cost of your household. Yep. Is a key kind of element to that. Definitely. Is if we can reduce the cost during operation, which is kind of the real focus of VA and sustainability, is reducing that cost and reducing the energy consumption, then we can have you can then spend more on coffee. You then can spend more on staff. Yeah. By reducing that big overhead, you're able to have a more sustainable business and a longer term growth.
And it's actually, it just makes logical sense as well as commercial sense, doesn't it? Why spend? And energy efficiency is a big piece, and it's such a hidden cost. I mean, the electricity cost to run a cafe is a significant thing on their profit and loss account. And if anything that can be done to minimise that, or minimise wastage of any sort, whether it's the hidden electricity cost, as you say, milk, even coffee, in terms of like grinders, that there are grinders that you have to like purge, or you're wasting coffee setting them up if they're not very easy to set up, all that kind of stuff. There's so much wastage that is just simply draining your profit, isn't there, across and that across the board in a cafe. And I think it's down to people like you and us to actually help advise cafes to minimise that loss and that wastage.
Yeah.
So they can spend it on things that matter and things that will actually get people through the door.
This is it. And you can then really build the portfolio that you want as kind of a customer. What is it I want from my cafe? What can I serve? And maybe I can upgrade the quality of the coffee coming into here rather than spending the lowest amount. And we're seeing it on the last podcast you were on as well. The cost of green is going up. The cost of everything's generally going up. The shipment costs are going up. And how do we offset that? And that starts in your operation. It's one of the biggest costs is what's happening while my cafe is open. Mm-hmm. And if you can reduce costs within there, and I'm not really speaking about like getting rid of staff. Staff is a key integral thing here.
100%.
It's about the electricity. It's about the water consumption. It's about the milk consumption. It's where wastage happens. Normally energy that say you're in London and you've got London water, which has then been filtered, heated up, then cooled, then heated up again. Yeah. And then it's used for steaming, it's used for coffee, it's ended up down the drain. You're flushing hot water down the drain.
Yeah.
Like
That you've paid to heat up.
that you've paid to heat up. It's some of the most expensive water you'll have in your life because it's gone through so many processes and so many filtrations.
It's gone through a filter you're paying for.
Yes.
You pay to heat it up, then you throw it away.
Exactly. So one of the things we try to incorporate into there is, for example, we have a thermal energy recovery system in our machines, which is a small coil which fits where hot water that would normally waste would run over at the drain box. And what that does is it keeps the heat in the system. So the more coffees you make, the more heat is in the system.
Yeah.
And when fresh water passes through, then it transfers that heat naturally. And that reduces your cost more and more.
Yeah, it's an impressive feature. I remember being shown that back a couple of years ago.
It's really interesting because the entire design of VA has been on sustainability for the last few years. And really, it's been at the core of the business. So on a factory level, we focus on using materials within the region, the Marche region, and then we also use materials within Italy itself. Things that would be imported are naturally imported, but what happens on a factory level is the goal is to achieve solar energy as the main source of the factory, and we're making real sustainable progress there. But really, the focus is in the cafe with the VA machines, with the Eagle ones that you're using. The way it uses small boilers to have fresh water, constant algorithms between the group head and the group boilers. There's an auto purge system, so you're not having to. You see it a lot in cafes where you'll knock out a puck, the barista will turn it on, and then they've essentially lost about close to 200 mils of water down the drain. And if you think they did that all day for hundreds of coffees, you're talking liters and liters of lost energy, heat, water, which affects your water filters, affects the machine, and any way to try and keep the usage lower and any way to keep more energy in the system itself has been kind of key.
The more sustainable you can make the coffee shop itself, you can then pass the benefits on to whether like you're paying your staff slightly more so you keep them longer because that's a massive thing, or whether you can pay the roaster and then the farmer a little bit more as well with a better quality coffee. This is it.
We talk about kind of the UK coffee scene. It's one of the most competitive out there, and it's not even the largest, but there are lots of machine manufacturers, lots of roasters, lots of options out there. And really one of the main points of differentiation is how can I save costs so I can run my business in the long term? Yeah. Because as things are getting more expensive, the question is, do you end up charging people more, or do you look at all elements? Like, how can I save costs? How can I kind of pass on a small one, and where can we negotiate?
And I think that's a really important thing. I mean, it's tough out there, isn't it? It is. Yeah. For cafe owners, business owners of any sort at the moment. It's by and large, it's tough out there. Yeah. And I think there's a few different thought processes that can go through business owners or cafe owners, whatever that can go through their head. They can either think, let's cut all the costs to the bone, like let's put our heads down, dig deep, and just get through this period, and hopefully there's light at the end of the tunnel and there's a brighter day ahead. That's a philosophy. But what we find actually, the cafes that are all starting to sort of leap ahead now are those that actually think, okay, we'll cut everything we can to the concrete that doesn't actually impact our operation. So energy, classic one. Wastage, another classic one. All these things that let's not throw away good money. So cut all of that to the concrete, and then actually think back to the vision piece we've been discussing. Like, what is my reason for being beyond simply earning a buck? And actually 100%. Just focus in on that. Focus in on why I'm here. Yeah. And then just really put as much energy as I can commercially afford to do into promoting that vision. And if that vision, if there's customers that will resonate with that vision, not only will you survive, you'll thrive.
Yeah, I think it's definitely the case. And you see it, whether you're using your walls for local artists and supporting them, or whether it's down to a roastery level, you're supporting the farms that you're buying from, you're supporting the customers you're buying from, you're supporting the community. I think there's a real there's the business element, but you can incorporate a lot of the sustainability and ecological impact and also the community impact into that model where you can actually make a real change beyond just, I'm trying to survive. You can go, I'm trying to survive, but also I host this lovely fundraiser once a year, which has a great impact on the local hospital. Or like I have this group which really relies on me every week for like running, and they really enjoy being here. And I've become part of their identity and their core. And there's a real opportunity to build that from the start, which puts you in a better frame of mind where you go, I know where I want to go.
And I think it's building on what you just said then. I think it's important that these cafes, whether you're an independent or you're a chain or you're even in a university cafe, which we do a lot of work with, for example, or just an off the high street cafe in any shape or form, by doing a fundraiser, as you say, supporting a local charity in itself is an inherently good thing to do.
Yeah.
Yes. No one's going to argue with that. But what it also does is it makes your potential customer buy into you on an emotional level that will go way beyond what that one morning did. Yeah. You may be giving coffee away, in essence. So coffee's for £1, and we've supported our customers and actually given them the coffee to do such things. And we love doing that kind of stuff because not only is it, as I say, a good thing to do for that particular charity, but it does that brings brand loyalty. So back to the brand,
comes back around.
Comes back to the brand thing. It's just good for your brand to do that kind of thing.
And I think if it's a customer listening or if it's a cafe listening, one of the big things is that you have power in by every dollar that you spend, you have power. Yeah. And this can be used to make a greater impact. If you're buying from your local, or you are buying from origins which there is more impact per dollar on the farmer, or if you're buying from, for example, the Peruvian cooperatives you work with, where you're empowering women in the region.
Cafe Femenino.
That's it. You have more impact with your money by choosing specifically what is you're trying to support. And then there are different opportunities there, whether it's origins, particular farms, there is different cafes which support different initiatives and different partners you work with that you can, as a customer, have a bigger impact on by buying that particular coffee.
Absolutely. And we've found customers, just building on what you're saying there about the cafe. Well, we've been buying the Cafe Femenino Peru. We're actually now just buying the Bolivian version of the same thing. But we've had customers that have literally gone ahead with that particular coffee purely based on the story. They haven't even tasted the coffee. Yeah. They've gone on the basis that we say it tastes great and it's got this and they've trusted us, which is fantastic. But that is the power of a story that is this legitimate, is that it will sell itself.
This is the thing. I think there's 12.5 million coffee farms around the world. Yeah. And choosing one comes down to one, what the roaster's supplying, but also the story behind it. Exactly. Because at this point, you are really differentiating by where can I support, what impact can it have, and what feedback loop does it have? Because one, it needs to taste good. But to be honest, when you're a lot of roasters, all the coffee they are making is tasting good because there is good coffee coming out of these origins.
Absolutely.
And with technology how it is, you're able to carry coffee to a really good state, but the relationship you have with the roaster, the relationship you have with the machine manufacturer means you can maximize the potential of that coffee to achieve the flavor profile that really tells a story back. Because one thing that always terrifies me is that someone will try a Rwandan coffee for the first time and they won't like it, and then they will associate all coffee from that region with that idea. Whereas actually, if we're maximizing the potential of this coffee and we're really dialing it in and we're working with cafes and we're working with all types of customers, then we are able to showcase the potential of coffee, both from the machine side and also from the roasting side.
Exactly. It's a couple of things that have come out of what you just said then. So you're absolutely right. And to be honest, I've done it myself. Where you try a coffee from a particular origin and you don't like it. For whatever reason, it's just not for me. So you immediately associate, well, I don't like coffee from that origin. That's the first thought, isn't it, in essence? But how wrong is that? And I say that as having thought that myself, because there's so many things that have gone into that. It could be a particular batch of coffee beans that just didn't work out for whatever reason, or it could have been roasted badly.
Yeah.
We often say to our clients that there's between 400 and 450 roasters in the UK. We would credit all of them doing a pretty decent job at roasting coffee.
Yeah.
There's really, really good ones and maybe not some quite good ones, but ultimately, by and large, they all do a perfectly good job at roasting coffee.
Yeah.
It's what is packaged around that brown bean.
Yeah.
Whether that's customer service, the equipment, the story of the coffee, the sustainability message, whatever it is, that is actually what sets us apart in the eyes of our in the eyes of our competition. And indeed, it's the same is for them. Like we're not professing to do anything wildly or wonderfully different with coffee that anybody else is doing. It's just what is packaged around
This is it.
that brown bean.
You're following kind of your goals with the coffee,
Absolutely.
what you're trying to roast to a certain profile, which you believe the customers will like and you yourselves like.
Absolutely.
And then you're looking at the cafes and asking, what's the right machine for you? Are you more someone focused at sustainability? Are you more someone focused at precision and a certain type of profile that you're trying to get out of it? And then really building around them. And something we do on our side as well is that just making sure people are very conscious of the choices they're trying to make, and they're fully informed before jumping in and saying, I will have this, because that place has it, or because that's all I've ever known. It's really, there's an opportunity there to have a greater and deeper relationship with all elements of the supply chain.
Definitely.
And it's whether you kind of grasp it and engage it is the real question.
And it comes back, as we've said, in all these things, it comes back to your brand, your own brand, and your vision as a brand, and what you want your customers to feel when they engage with your brand, whether it's sitting in a cafe, having even a takeaway coffee. There's so many elements that go into that, from the story of the coffee to the roaster, to the machine it's made on, to the way the barista smiled at you. There's so many different elements. A cafe owner's job is incredibly multifaceted, isn't it? There's so many moving parts.
You are a business owner, you are QC, you are admin, you are finance. It's everything.
It is.
And it's hard as well.
And that's why you need good partners.
This is it. You need the support there. Say you want to be, you want to know more about your coffee, they'll come to you. They say they want to know more about the sustainability side of things, they'll come as well and ask questions. Say they have no clue who to use for a tea provider, they can still turn around to you and ask who you recommend, who you're working with. Is there anything that we can do under the same package? And that's a really good opportunity then to build a relationship and then build more relationships and kind of cast the web out to create the right package really for someone. We were speaking about origins briefly, and one of the, I came through Youth Academy, which was mentioned on a previous podcast, and now somewhat overseeing it. And one of the cuppings that I sorted out for the current group was from El Salvador. And it was from one farm. And it was a blind cupping, but 9 varietals from that farm. Everyone thought they were different countries, different origins. They had no idea where these coffees were from. But there is diversity within one farm.
Absolutely.
Let alone between farms, let alone like countries.
I was once at a cupping, just
again,
building on what you're saying there. This is a long, long time ago. Probably about 12 or 13 years ago, and we were cupping coffees from one farm. To be honest, I can't remember the origin. I'm pretty sure it was Central America, but it was quite a big farm, and we coffeed. It was the same varietal. We cupped coffee from the field at the bottom and a field at the top. The only difference was elevation.
Yes,
and it would tasted like 2 different coffees. It was phenomenal.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
Sometimes we will, like in other industries, bring up the term terroir. But it is a complex term and complicated. In tea, it comes down to there is elevation, different sides of the farm. Was it grown at higher point? Was there more moisture, less moisture? And in coffee, we do less of it, but we are consciously aware as roasters and also providers that there is a diversity in the farm. And when we are cupping samples, we are choosing what's the right one for the end user.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's really, definitely agree with that.
Well, David, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it.
It was a good chat. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Thank you.